Very nice. Very nice.
It is so surprising. I can't believe it.
As everyone says, that is surprising.
The story goes that in the 1790s, a Captain Davenport ordered from Gillows, the famous furniture makers of Lancaster, a small desk. And it was from that beginning that all small desks of this type got their name, the Davenport. The early ones were very plain until about 1810. They were just simple little boxes with a row of drawers and a top which slid forward like that to enable you to sit at it.
Yes.
The Victorian ones were permanently that shape, rather like a school desk.
Yes.
This one is quite exceptional for many reasons. Firstly, it retains its original little gallery here, and it has the most wonderful little fitment at the side, so I'm going to pull that round. Just here, when you open the lid, you pull a lever inside, and out shoots your little compartment for ink and stamps, pens, whatever, seals as they would have been in those days.
Yes.
One of its other interesting features is the arrangement of these shelves which slide out each side.
Yes.
Right. Now, in order to preserve the proportion, when closed, it has to balance up both sides. So they've made the lips of the trays almost a deceit. One folds over the other. So the lip on this side comes up, the lip on that side goes down. While we're around this side, and this is quite a rare feature, is that instead of a bank of drawers as you normally expect, there's a cupboard door inside of which is an arrangement of drawers with these military-style handles, flush handles. Now, let's have a look at the whole thing. And another unusual feature are these columns. Now, that particular shape of column gives us a fairly accurate date of post-1810, but pre-1825. Tell me a little history about it, from your point of view.
I acquired it about 40 years ago. I was very interested 10 years previous to that, but it was only until the person moved that I was able to avail myself of it.
The whole quality of the piece, as I've said, is superb, and it takes it out of the ordinary range of Davenport price, because there's so many made from each period. I mean, it's an extremely popular piece of furniture. If you were to see 100 Davenports, you'd be lucky to see one of this model.
Really?
A good average Victorian Davenport will make 2,500 to 3,000. A good Regency Davenport of the normal pattern, the model, will make 6,000 to 8,000.
Right.
This one should certainly be insured for £12,500.
Gosh.
It is among the best Davenports you'll ever see. Looking round, I can see some very early pieces of carving on what is traditionally known as this monk's bench. So describing a piece of furniture which first looks like a table, you lift up the top and it turns into a seat. Now, there are many of these around, and I suppose in some 40 years, I've only seen a couple that might actually be totally genuine. So let's hear the story of this one from your end.
My husband and I were married in 1943 when the war was on. It was impossible to get new furniture if you wanted it. And we both liked old furniture. We were given the princely sum in total with our wedding gifts of £10. And we saw this in a local dealer's window and we both wanted it. And it was 10 guineas. And when we went in to buy it and he heard that we had £10 wedding gifts, he said, "To you, £10.
Isn't that a nice story?
Yes.
That makes it rather a special piece of furniture, doesn't it?
Yes.
If we take the top off, I'm going to ask you, if you're very kind, and pull that plug out. That's it. I'm going to put that over here. Right, now let's have a look at it. This piece here of carving here is very early. Certainly early 16th century, could be late 15th century, 1480, 1520, that sort of period.
Oh.
It's absolutely wonderful. But it's out of something, it's come from something.
Yes.
It wasn't made for this.
No.
And if we look at the seat, this is quite new. This
Yes.
is 1850, 1860. Could be replacement, but is it built up? That's what we're trying to establish.
Yes.
Look at the column on your side. A split column, a piece with a baluster, that wonderful, wonderful crusty colour surface to it. But then look at this one. Totally different. Equally early, not as early as that, but 17th century, both of these. The gun barrel stem, 1640, 1660, either just before or just after the Civil War.
Yes.
Now let's tip it back and see. Here, we've got lovely chipped carving, but it doesn't balance. We've got this palmette up here, some arcading, and then nothing that end. This, again, almost certainly from the 1660s. At the latest, could well be 1630, 1640. I think this is one of the best examples of the period of 1850 to 1870, when you could go into Soho in London, where you bought pieces of early furniture and commissioned their being manufactured into something else. So while some of this is 1480s to 1520, some of it is 1630, some of it is probably 1690, the rest of it's 1850 to 1860. So let's just put the top back on again. We don't need, we need not put the pegs in, just leave it like that as we started.
That's right.
Now, they still have a market value.
Really?
Oh yes, oh yes. I mean, it was still a reasonable investment
Yes.
at the time. Your
Yes.
£10 has certainly turned into, today, the best part of £2,000.
I can remember this table when I was just a wee small lad, probably about 4 or 5 year old, at my grandparents' house where they used to live in Watford in Hertfordshire. I know what it's made of, but apart from that, I don't really know what period it is or what its value is. So,
You say you know what it's made of. I'm going to test you now. What's the wood then?
I suspect that's. I don't think it's per oak because I see no medullary rays in it, but I suspect it's per elm.
Well, I didn't say that to trick you. It's not a bad guess, and I like the way you've gone through the process of oak with medullary rays, etc. And you're quite right. It's not oak, and you can't see medullary rays. It's actually not an English or indigenous wood at all, or a British wood.
Thuya wood. Thuya.
Well done. Now you should have said that first time. It is Thuya wood. Do you know where it's from? The Thuya wood.
West Indies, isn't it?
No, it's from the Atlas Mountains in Morocco.
Right.
And it came into this country, or into the British Isles, into use really through France. And of course, because the northern Morocco, North Africa was a French colony, and they found the wood and first used it in about the 1840s and 50s in regular quantity.
Right. It has the whole thing has a very French look and feel to it. French stroke Italian to my eye. Certainly not of English. You mean that's not an English piece, design style-wise, I wouldn't have said.
Right. I'm going to push you now because it's interesting. You've got your own thought process going. So why isn't it English then? What?
Quite probably it's English construction because the quality of construction is extremely high throughout. I mean, the dovetailing on the drawers and the drawer slip in here, it's all tells me it's very, very English. But in terms of construction, but the style of it, it's just not English furniture.
I don't think I need to be doing this, do you? You're doing very well on your own. You're quite right. I mean, that's exactly English drawer construction. Wonderful mahogany, lovely sort of cotton beaded moulding there. Typical of what you expect of an English drawer. But of course, in this, it's not Italian style. I call it more a French style. Right. And when you look at the base, those sort of columnar supports, it's typical of what they'd call the Louis XVI style. Right. And that style became very, very popular from about the 1850s onwards. And of course, there were lots of political troubles in France, and a lot of French craftsmen came over to England to work. And French designers were very, very sought after in England and paid more than their English counterparts to bring in this very sophisticated French design. And the ormolu here is typical. I mean, the ormolu is an English word for bronze d'or moulu.
Yeah.
So it's just simply gilt bronze, or actually it's brass, amazingly, but we always call it bronze. It just sounds better. But the colour of that is more typical of the English colour of metalwork. It's a good piece of furniture. I think that if you had it in a showroom done up in a London or showroom where they like this type of high quality, high Victorian furniture, I can see it being 6,500, £7,000 retail price.
My parents were going to visit some friends of theirs in Huddersfield, and as they were getting out of the Land Rover, there's some kids carrying this down the street.
Down the street?
Yeah, and it was sort of back-endish. And my mother says, what are you doing with the sideboard? I said, it's going on the bonfire.
November the 5th,
November the 5th,
Yeah.
It was going on a bonfire. And she says to this kid, she says, here's £5, put it in the Land Rover. And they did, and that was how we...
£5?
£5, but it was 30 odd years ago.
What a bargain. Would you take 10 for it?
Double my money.
Double your money, no problem at all.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what it is. This is a late Georgian sideboard, about 1800, 1810.
Really?
You can feel on the surface here, there's a slight roughness to it. And that happens when all the dirt and the wax and oil is oozing out of the pores. And that's actually not quite nice, because it shows really that it hasn't had a lot of use and it hasn't been ever over-polished.
Yes.
So that is important. It's a nice touch, that. The only things that aren't original on it are the handles. Otherwise, it's pretty much as the day it was made.
Yes.
Now, a fiver for it 30 years ago. Well, if this came into auction, if I was cataloguing this, I'd certainly put it in at about 1,800 to 2,500.
2,500.
And I really
Yeah.
think if you're thinking about insurance value, you've got to be thinking in excess of £4,000.
£4,000. Lovely.
Not
Yes.
a bad.
Not bad for
increase.
£5, is it?
Not bad at all.
Mother bought this in a jumble sale about 65, 67 years ago.
Oh, wow, right.
Yes.
A jumble set, how wonderful.
Yes.
What a thing to find, because it's very heavy to cart around in a jumble set.
I wouldn't make the car very
And it's
far.
made of black Belgian marble.
Belgian marble.
Yeah, yeah.
Ah,
But
good.
it's not Belgian or French.
No, no.
What nationality do you think it
we
is?
thought it was maybe Italian.
Very clever, but wrong. It's English.
Yes.
This is made probably on the Duke of Devonshire's estate.
The Duke of
Devonshire,
Devonshire.
Chatsworth,
Oh, yes.
in Derbyshire.
Yes.
And there's a difference between this type of marquetry, which is pietre dure, hard stone inlay,
Yes.
the Italian marquetry, and the English marquetry.
Yes.
The English is much more complicated, much more difficult to do. This is a solid marble top.
Yes.
And what's happened is they've cut these little holes in to let this
Yes.
into the main surface. The Italians have a thin veneer of marble on top and cut out a little stencil,
yes.
if you like, which
Yes,
is an
yes.
easier, still very difficult, but easier
Will be-
technique
will be
than this
easier.
very typical English technique.
Yes.
Sort of Ashburton area of Derbyshire, a lovely, it's a great little marble table. I mean, it's such a pretty size and so fresh, because the date, we haven't talked, is about 1840 or 50.
1840.
Yeah.
Ah.
It's a lot old. It was already 100 years old or so when it was bought by your family, at least.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Now, I've got to value this because I think it's a great piece of furniture. Insure it for £5,000.
5,000. Very nice. Very nice.
Now, Lord Cholmondeley, of all the wonderful things that are on display in the public parts of the house, these items have come from the private apartments, haven't they?
Yes, this has always been in the hall, the entrance hall downstairs, and under one of the mahogany tables, and used as a waste paper basket, I'm afraid.
with the side
Very practical.
You could always put a liner in it, I suppose,
Well,
you want to
could.
do that. There should be a pair to it.
There is a pair.
There is a pair. That's the other side.
The other
waste paper
side.
basket. You're coming in or going out of the house. Well, they're plate buckets. That accounts for the fact that it has a gap so that you can lift the plates in and out. And they were carried from the kitchen to the dining room in pairs and carried on a yoke. So you did. I mean, they're so heavy. Anyway, that's
Like
quite
milk
heavy
pails.
with that. Yes.
Yes.
Milk pails. So they've sort of carried them in pairs. This is rather a nice size one, and probably for dessert plates rather than dinner plates.
Right.
It's got a particularly pretty little brass mount around here, which is sort of 1810 to 1815. Which is about the right date for these things. They sort of tended to go out of fashion by about 1830 and weren't introduced as such until the sort of 1780s, so they're a fairly short lifespan. And their value, I mean, in pairs usually today between £6,000 and £8,000, depending on their size and quality. But of course, as soon as you have a provenance like this great house, then prices can make anything, because in the future it means that someone's going to own it and say, well, this came from Hatton Hall.
Yes.
So I think we have to ignore the provenance side and say a pair of these should be insured for, say, £7,500 to £8,000.
Really?
But as their provenance makes them unique, then they couldn't be replaced.
Well, I think we certainly shouldn't be using them as waste paper.
Well,
I should find another use.
Put a few plates in just to remind you what they're for.
Exactly.
And then we have this
lovely.
extraordinary wassail bowl, which is made of one of the most dense timbers known, which is lignum vitae. If you threw that into the lake, it would sink.
Really?
Oh, yes, it does not float. And this was a wassail at Christmas time, and you toasted your friends. They're almost big enough to get into, isn't it?
Like a sort of punch.
Absolutely. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Sure. With apples and alcohol and all sorts of things. I mean, it really is a stunning piece. It's one of the largest I've ever seen. There is one, maybe a tad bigger, but if not certainly the same size, in the Victorian Albert Museum, which has a crisscross pattern cut onto it, and the original fitments to go in those little holes. And those were little cups with a spike on. And I suppose 1640 this was made.
Really?
Yeah.
Very early.
Yes. Where does this live, by the way?
This lives by Sir Robert Walpole's desk in the library. Doesn't have any purpose. It just sits there.
Don't sort of
And we've
throw
always
anything into
wondered-
this, eh?
No, well, I suppose with a lid. But
It stands on the floor.
But really, it should be exhibited.
This, in today's market, could easily make £25,000.
Really?
Yes. So pop it on a table now.
Definitely.
Well, of course, the most important feature here is that particular scroll.
Really?
First drawn by a man called George Smith in a book published in the early 1800s. He published another in 1826, which included an acanthus leaf like that. So the combination of those two gives us a date for the table of 1826 to 1830.
Yes.
It's got this lovely rosewood, which is in such good condition, nice and untouched. And these wonderful scrolls come down here, all complementing that sort of date. So is it a family table?
Yes.
Oh, lovely. It has the
was.
feel of it, you know.
It was, I remember as a small child sitting round the table at Christmas playing cards.
Oh, wonderful. Well, it's a tilt-top table. The type is known as a loo table because it was invented for playing the card game of loo.
Oh.
But it became, obviously, synonymous with any large round table. I'm going to lower this down, and what... I mean, you've got these marvellous panels of inlaid
Brass.
or marquetry brass. This was a feature which began in the 18th century and then was revived after 1815 in London. This has been stripped down, which is a great shame.
Yes,
What happened?
They had a fire in the house before I got it. It didn't actually get burnt, but it got...
Smoke damage. Smoke damage. Yes, that is a shame, obviously, because the base is in virtually untouched condition, and stripping it off like that, you know, is a pity. But nevertheless, it's still a most interesting table, and quite a valuable table too. A table like this would cost you about £15,000 to replace.
Would it?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, it does look nice when you see it down,
Absolutely.
looking at it like this.
Looked at from this angle, this is a very ordinary Victorian table, a standard...
Not attractive.
not terribly attractive. Standard cabriole base and a baluster pillar. But if we turn it around, we see something really quite remarkable. Now that, I think, is absolutely superb. That is one of the finest pieces of marquetry I've seen in a long while. Absolutely stunning. Do you use this table?
No, we don't, in fact. The house is too small to have it in. One, and two, we're not awfully fond of it, for her.
You don't like it?
No. And having said that, of course, I think the workmanship is magnificent.
What puzzles me is the difference in quality between the very humdrum base and pillar and this. And my guess is that this is a fairly standard Victorian table,
Yes.
onto which some specialist has decided to apply his skills. Would that be right?
I would have thought so, yes. Whether it was, of course, it was in that exhibition.
It's an exhibition piece.
Yes.
I see.
And
When
I
was
suspect that was why it was possibly done, or what it was possibly done for.
So this was actually made for an exhibition. Do we
Well,
know?
that I wouldn't know. but it's certainly with the medals and certificates that it's won.
Well, let's have a look at that medal. Just Metropolitan and Provincial Industrial Exhibition Prize Medal, 1866. And this is the medal that was awarded for this table.
That was awarded for that, but the actual certificate, of course, is a couple of years earlier.
Well, let's just have a look at this certificate. Yes, this is dated 1864. Here is a view of the exhibition, and here it is signed by Russell, Gladstone and Shaftesbury, three of the top politicians of the late 19th century. And the name of the man to whom it was awarded?
Selly.
And who is Selly?
That I don't know. It certainly came down through the family, but whether he was anything to do with the family or whether we'd acquired it or what, I don't know.
Let's just have a closer look at this top. It uses some very, very typical late Victorian woods. So here we've got amboyna from the Pacific. This is a Burr form of Purdue. Here we've got coconut wood from the palm tree. Here we've got a type of variegated ebony, which the trade called marble wood, for obvious reasons. It's beautifully veined and variegated. And the precision with which these little lunettes are graduated from the inside to the out is just stunning. I think it is of immaculate quality. Let's just pop that down and think a little bit about its value. My guess is that if you tried to buy this, you'd need to be paying somewhere in the region of £7,500, £8,000.
Thank you.
Excellent. W.M. Simpson of Darlington. Do you know those makers?
No.
Well, I tell you, that's all the years I've done the roadshow. I think from the second year, that's 24 years. This is the first time I've had a piece of furniture which is identifiable and local to the show.
Oh, good.
Wonderful. And it is late 19th century, but of the most superb quality. And looking at it, we tend to forget how huge the mansions were all over England, but particularly in the north of England. Vast libraries were built for people who were bibliophiles, who wanted to look like bibliophiles. And this is a fitment from such a library. And you've got two of them. There's one at the back.
Yeah.
It almost matches, but it's as if the man had his collection and it enlarged and he wanted another piece to fit in, so he gradually filled the library with pieces like this. And they're all made by the same company. And then later on, this was added, and there's another one to that at the back too. And there might have been 4 or 6 of these, of which these were salvaged. Now, before we go on, where did you find them, or how have you come by them?
Well, a colleague of mine bought a rather large house in Park Road, and he found this in the coal cellar, and he offered it to me.
Right.
So I cleaned it up and used it as 4 different cabinets.
Well, what we can tell about the man is that not only did he collect books, but he also collected either manuscripts or objects that went with the books, because you have a glass top on all of them.
Oh, yeah.
Now, there's no point in normally you'd have a library bookcase would have a solid top. You bring out the book, you put it up here to read. There's no point. This obviously surrounded the walls, around which there would have been a huge library table or a desk to put the books, so that you could still see the items in here on display.
So that's the idea of the glass?
Absolutely.
Oh, good.
And that's why these come from a separate bit of furniture, because originally you wouldn't put this on top of a display set.
No.
So we shall never know where these come. These are slightly later. Just look at the quality, first of all. Go down here. This is absolutely superb. Now, this is almost certainly machine carved, i.e. it's done on a jig, which means not that the man didn't operate it by hand, but that he made several at the same time. So this precisely matches that.
So this is
all the segments.
This is how they got identical.
Absolutely. All identical pieces. Now, what isn't identical is the quality of that work with when we come up to the quality of this, which is much looser. It's slightly less crisp. The wood is the same, could have come from the same batch of timber. The wood is perfectly matching this, but the quality of the construction and the quality of the carving is slightly less. So this might have been made 3 months, 4 months later by a different man in a different part of the workshop. So what we've got left is only a fraction of what there must have been. Goodness knows where the rest went, but so much was demolished in the 1950s and 60s. But it's a wonderful example. And here I think it's a good opportunity to explain the difference between the values that we give. I'm going to tell you what this would cost to replace.
Mm-hmm.
So to make or to replace a pair of cabinets of this quality would cost in the region of £2,500 to £3,000 each cabinet. Now that's as a piece of furniture, not as an antique value, it's just as it is. This quality, this timber is marvellous. These pair of cabinets on top, slightly less expensive to make and or find and replace, but round about £1,500 to £2,000 each. Now then, that's what it would cost you if you wanted to replace that, to go and buy it new. Or replace it second hand, whatever. You wouldn't get that if you tried to sell it, because that would mean you've got to try and find somebody who needs this object, this pair of cabinets. So in that case, you'd get approximately half the insurance value. The difference between being in the finding, the profit for either the auctioneer or the dealer or whatever, it's the difference between purchase and sale. And so if you wanted to sell it, you could safely say that you would get in the region of £4,000. If you want to replace, your best part of £8,000. All right?
Okay.
That's the difference, and I think they're wonderful. Historically, so interesting and wonderful to see at long last a piece of local furniture. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Can I shake your hand?
Thank you. Of course you may.
Thank you.
Not at all.
I love this little calling card up the top here. It says, made from sycamore wood, cut down by the Right Honourable W.E. Gladstone on the Howden estate. Where did you get this from?
Well, we went to a boat sailing, Sully, and I seen it there and I asked how much it was, and the gentleman said £50. I thought, oh, a lovely dress green for the bedroom, until I unwrapped it. And then I seen all these signatures.
What is it, a country house collection, do you think, of people's signatures?
Yeah.
The owners, instead of getting them to sign visitors' books or something like that, had got them to sign little pieces of paper or give their signed calling cards and mounted them in this screen to great effect. You've got some wonderful ones here. There's Thomas Edison here, the American, and down here you've got another lovely little grouping. You've got Hilkane the author and Henry James the author as well. You've got all sorts of people. I mean, it is just quite extraordinary, all the great and the good, and probably the not so good as well, I should think like that. And we've got another one, a great Cardiff item here, Bute, the Marquis of Bute here. And of course, he was mayor of Cardiff and obviously did quite a lot for Cardiff. Now, are you going to do this trick with it? Let's close it up. Now, the horror is that we'll open it up and find we've got the same side. Now, this side is even more spectacular. Wilkie Collins, who wrote The Moonstone and The Woman in White, and was credited with the first detective fiction. Lily Langtry, Edward VII's mistress. It's all quite extraordinary. And it's wonderful to speculate, actually, what sort of parties all these people had. You know, the King's mistress. I don't see the King having signed this, Edward VII having signed it at all. I mean, you've got how many?
529
You've
signatures.
counted every single one
Yeah.
of them? Yes. Have you catalogued every single one of them and
No,
written them all down?
Not at the moment.
Well, you've got everybody here. The screen, I'm sure, a late 19th century screen, certainly worth the £50 you paid for it. But I have to say, it's the signatures that really interest me. They're fantastic. Everybody who you could have possibly wanted, really, from the late 19th century. So I value this at between £2,000 and £3,000.
Really?
Nice thing to dress behind, isn't it?
Yeah.
Thank you for bringing it in.
No pleasure. Thank you very much. Lovely.
This desk has been around all my life. It was bought by my father shortly after the war when my parents were setting up home, and it quickly found its way into my bedroom as a child. About 10 years ago, one of my friends came round and asked if it was by somebody called Barnsley. He knew more about furniture than me, which set me thinking. And I bought a book and did my research, and it made me wonder if indeed it was by either Barnsley or by Jimson. So over to you.
I think that I'm going to start with the date of this. I think it's 1910, something like that. So relatively early of that. It's late for the Cotswold School, if you like, but relatively early for the Barnsley Jimson type piece of furniture. But what I'm going to do is quote Ernest Jimson's great nephew, Donald Jimson.
Right.
Because he's often called in to be asked about, is this by Jimson or Barnsley? And his reaction is, most of the time, I don't know. He can't tell. The books don't really tell you. And I don't think we know. They didn't sign their furniture. There's no labels on it at all. Let's have a look at the inside first, just to see. You say you had it in your bedroom?
Oh, it looks like it.
We're using it for homework?
Mugs, I should think. Cups.
And what a shame the hinges have been replaced.
Yes, that's one of the things we want to get sorted.
Yeah, interesting. It'd be quite a problem to sort out, but it's worth doing it. So let's get back to the question: who designed it? It's very strong, isn't it? And when you actually stand back from it and look at it, and that wonderful wishbone structure underneath,
yes.
It's very, very good indeed. So clearly, it's by one of this arts and crafts school, and your friend was on the right track. I think this type of furniture is really underrated. It's English furniture at its best. I mean, Jimson himself knew William Morris. And it was Morris who told him to go with Barnsley to London, to an art school of architecture, where there were people like Norman Shaw, some of the great architects of the late Victorian era. And they've carried that through into the last century now, into the 20th century, that tradition of crafts making. And there are no nails, virtually. It's all handmade, as you expect in the early days, 16th, 17th century. The idea of all these dowels or pins here is typical of the arts and crafts movement, back to basics, and all the better for it. I think it's lovely. Made, of course, of solid oak. You don't find much around. What would you pay for it today?
Well, if they were Barnsley, I would think it might be worth about 5,000, but I don't know. That's a guess.
And if it were Jimson?
I would have thought something similar, but I'm
about the same.
Yes.
I think that I think it would make that at auction in this present state. So I think if you're insuring this, probably even 7,000 or 8,000, and it's going up. Any idea what period this is?
Well, I've always been led to believe it's Georgian, but I don't know. I don't know for certain. Okay.
George III.
George III, right? Splendid.
It's about 1770.
Yeah, right.
Now, this form of table, before we go into the exact date, was virtually invented or certainly promoted by a Scotsman.
Right.
A Scots architect called Robert Adam.
Right. Oh, right. What wood is it?
Mahogany. But it's not the best mahogany, and it's got a lot of wear and tear. It looks like a family piece. How long have you had it?
I've had it forever, as long as I've been around, and as far as I know, it's been in the house in which I live, in which my family has lived for 200 odd years.
Right.
So that's all I know about it. It seems to me it's surprisingly high. Is that about the height?
It's typical of the period. It's a carving table, basically.
Right.
And you can see this wear and tear it's had here. I mean, this is 250 years of wear and tear.
Yeah.
This is more recent. It's a vase of flowers or something like that somebody's put on there.
Yeah.
Typical. Don't do it, please.
No, right.
Have you ever noticed one little added extra it's got on it?
What?
I was just crawling around underneath, and under here are 3 finger marks. You see these? The little gouges here.
Yeah.
Right. If I put my fingers in there like that and pull.
Oh no, I never knew that existed.
Isn't that nice?
Well, it's a total surprise. I didn't know it existed.
It looks like it hasn't been opened for a while. It's a bit dusty there. Look, it's. I mean, it's hardly ever been used. This. See, it's very clever.
Yeah. Yeah. Good heavens.
But also, what I like about this, I mean, it's got a lot of sophistication about it, yet at the same time, I love this fluting here, this sort of copied from ancient Greece, this fluting. But then this, what's called an oval patra, this flower head here. But I can't see it on this one, but the one here, that's actually nailed on.
Good heavens.
Look, little nails.
Yes, I see, yeah.
So whoever made this probably didn't make these. Somebody else made them. He bought them in and just stuck them on.
Yeah.
Interesting for what is a sophisticated piece of furniture.
That's not cheating? No. Well.
No, it's perfectly genuine piece. So we need to value it. I mean, it's Georgian furniture, I think most people know, has gone up in value recently. Have you had it valued in the last few years or anything? Has there been any valuation on it? It
was valued for probate when my aunt died, which is 3 years ago. And I think it was, they valued it at £12,000, which seemed to me an extraordinarily high figure, but I don't really know what I'm looking at. So that's what it was.
It does seem an awful lot of money, doesn't it, for what is essentially just a side table and a bit scratched.
Right.
Well, I think that today, for your insurance policy, you should insure it for £30,000.
Thank you very much. That's totally amazing.
is just delightful. The shape of the top followed through with the front, and this lovely colour. And it's a little gem, I think. It dates from the early 18th century. I mean, difficult to be too precise, but 1710 to 1720, that sort of period. In England, it would be Queen Anne / George I. But I don't think it's an English one. I don't think it's Irish, really. I think it's continental. It has this flow to it. If we say Dutch, it's that sort of area, that sort of feel to it. And they influenced the rest of the Western world and later on America. And you see this type of double serpentine curve developing into a block front if it were American of the 1740s. So structurally, it's a very interesting thing. The way they've used this heavily curled veneer, this walnut with these burrs in, and divided it in two and opened it up like a butterfly's wing, so that it reflects both sides. Wonderful, and a lovely crusty colour, not over clean. These handles are new. They're about 1890 to 1900.
Right.
Whereas these are the original escutcheons.
Okay.
Now, they used exactly the same metalware in Holland as they did in England and in France at this time. So this is no indication of provenance, but those are certainly of the period of the chest, 1710 to 1720. And interestingly, you can see where the original handles went, which precisely matched this escutcheon in pattern. If we go to the bottom, it should have little bun feet, but little tiny, like if you squashed a melon, rather like that, sort of an oval shape, much lower and a little bit more round, if you like, a little bit more chubby, and far shallower. So I suppose it would have stood at least 2 inches lower on the ground.
Okay, yes.
Now, for one reason or another, we will never know, it wasn't tall enough for a particular purpose. And not only did they raise the feet, they also put a new rail in here, because that rail is nothing to do with it at all.
Yes.
I called it a little gem to start with. You can imagine it would have looked a perfect proportioned little piece of furniture.
Right.
Do you use it now?
What do I use it for?
Yeah.
I use it for holding my socks, and the top drawer is junk.
A sock and junk chest. Well,
That's
why
right.
is that super? I suppose if it turned up today and you, or rather, let's put it the other way, if you lost it or it got damaged and you wanted to replace it,
Yes.
it would cost you £8,000 to £10,000.
Right.
All right?
As everyone says, that is surprising.
Where did this chap come from?
Came from locally. Yes, just down the road I bought this one.
Did you?
Yes.
Because it's a most extraordinary construction. Layer upon layer of iron, wrought iron, these outer bands which are riveted onto a pine carcass are overlaid on top of some more metal here. And I guess the idea of the thing is there are no banks. You're really trying to deter any burglar from having anything to do with your precious objects, and wrapping what is effectively a timber coffer in iron, which is what we're doing here, applying these massive lugs, the padlocks and the iron hasps, is going to frighten any potential chap away from getting in at the precious objects. Famously difficult to date, the English ones are often called Armada chests. This one, I guess, was probably made around about 1600, something like that. But not here, I think probably on the continent, maybe in Spain or maybe in Italy. And if we have a look inside, you can see this original pine timber interior. And you'd think that there would be a dramatically complicated lock inside that keyhole, when in fact it's a really silly little Toy Town lock inside. That lock is not going to deter anybody with a crowbar.
Right.
What's going to deter them is looking at this very elaborate iron-bound arrangement outside. So Spanish or Italian, around about 1600 in date, and a really delightful object. And as to its value, they are famously difficult to value, and I think on a good day, this would probably bring between £4,000 and £6,000, £3,000 to £5,000, £4,000 to £6,000, that sort of money.
You know, when this was made, it was part of a magnificent dining room set, including a huge sideboard, the pedestals of which were this sarcophagus shape, which was introduced about 1810. There was a big sideboard cupboard each side, big board over the top, and this went underneath and matched perfectly the rest of the set. Now, from 1810 to 1830, they were high style fashion. By about 1840, they'd gone out of fashion. They've been used as log boxes and goodness knows what for years, and now they're coming back into fashion. People are using them for wine. But I want to have a look first at the designs on here, which give us that precise dating. Now, you have three major things to look for. Apart from the shape, which of course is that ancient sarcophagus, as I mentioned, you have a gadrooning here, which is spiraled. So it goes that way and meets in the center here, and it gives that sort of great feel to it, lifting it up, making it look really important. It's a wonderful, wonderful shape. And you get that on silver at the same period. Then this part here is called nulling. And that's simply a bobbin turning. And they split the stick down the center, and it's a half circle molding. But best of all are these feet. Lion's paw feet, you might say, well, could be Victorian. They're not Victorian because you have here a formalized lotus leaf, and it really gives it that much life, and it's important. The first drawing for that was published in 1826, and it could have been made within 10 years of that. So, tell me the family history.
Well, my great aunt was really good on sale rooms and house sales.
Oh, right.
And her house was absolutely crammed with furniture. And when I was coming up to 4, this came into our house. I liked it very much because it was good for sliding on.
You sat on here and slid down?
Yes. Since then I have
You've stopped doing
a
that,
bit
yes.
of furniture, yes.
And here inside, you can see, without any doubt, its original purpose was for drinks. This comes from the period when, of course, it was fashionable to lock the drink up when you weren't using the dining room, rather than just an open wine bucket. And this has got its lead lining in, and the nice thing is that you can see here the places where there were little partitions, went from side to side, and when required, they would fill it full of ice and keep the wine cool. The interesting thing is that there is no sign of a tap to let the water out, which meant that this thing, full of water, had to be lifted up, taken out, and emptied. I mean, so apart from its size and importance, you can tell it came from a great house because that requires staff.
Yes.
But it's just a fabulous quality piece. I mean, this is wonderful timber, choice of timber. I would think it's not unreasonable to imagine that it would have been made in the north of England, simply from the quality, which is wonderful. And today, to replace it, you'd have to pay somewhere around £6,500. So it was a jolly expensive slide, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Yes. I bought it 6 years ago in Stowe, and I was a little concerned when I got it home to notice that the drawers seemed to be made out of recycled pieces of timber. I wonder
Really?
whether it's entirely original.
Let's have a look. I mean, I've seen nice oak lining, but
The underside.
Right. Now I see what you mean.
Well, you should see the second drawer is even more interesting, in as much as it's more brightly coloured.
That's fantastic. That is fantastic. The other one?
And very similar.
All right. I'll tell you what, I'm going to put this one on top of that one. Well, let me allay your fears first of all. There's nothing wrong with this. These pieces of furniture, particularly in the country, are made on large estates.
Right.
And this was where they would have stored wood that was not used. Whether or not it was carved, it was cut for a purpose and then simply not used and kept in the workshop. And then one day, somebody was asked to make a little chest of drawers for one purpose or another. In this case, most likely a house on the estate or a servant's bedroom. And what should we use for the lining? Use some of that old stuff we've got in the corner there. You know, well, it's got carving. That won't matter. No one will see. And so they used these boards, which in this case were made for panelling in a room. And if this was made in 1740, these panels were 150 years old. These panels are 1500, 1550, 16th century. Difficult to be precise. Either Tudor or early Elizabethan. And they are wonderful. I've seen, obviously, pieces of furniture with similar carving on, and I've seen sometimes some decoration, some pigment. We know that they used to paint a lot of furniture in the 1540s through to the 1580s. But never have I seen the pigment protected, as it were. I've never seen it as pure as this. This is like the day it was painted. Here you can see the thickness. It's a sort of tempera. It's a wonderful texture. And that's never really been corroded by anything. It's just never been touched. So these were stacked up for 150 years and then bunged into a little chest. And you can see where they've chamfered the edges off to make it fit. Absolutely stunning. Imagine, a panelled room. These are from a panelled room, I'm sure.
It's not a Tudor rose, is it?
Well, yes.
Almost stylized.
Yes, absolutely. A stylized Tudor rose, and this is a sort of almost a guilloche moulding, guilloche banding pattern there. I think they are wonderful, wonderful. What do you do now? I mean, sort of put them on the wall, and maybe you should protect. Maybe you just leave them as they are. I don't know. Difficult to keep showing your friends every time they come round.
Yes.
How much did you pay for the chest?
£1,000.
Well, it's worth £1,000. A little fruitwood chest of drawers. I mean, certainly improved on that in 6 years. But these are a bonus. I suppose that panel is worth about £1,000, and that one £1,000.
Surprised me.
It's very exciting. Very exciting.
Belongs to a friend of mine,
Right.
and it was inherited by her late husband in 1940s, and I presume it had been in the family for quite a long time.
Quite a long time.
That's all I know.
Be interesting to see how far back in that family. It has that look of something that's been in a home for a long time.
I think it
that
be.
sort of
Yes.
sort of aura about
Yes.
it. It's just a cupboard with, when you look closely, some oval panels in the doors, a fairly shallow bow front, and you could actually walk past it. It's not. It doesn't stand and say something until you do stop and look. And then one starts to realize that these oval panels are in the center of a rectangle which has this lovely mitered corner of veneer. And when you start to look at that, you realize that this is not just any veneer. This is satinwood, which was an extremely expensive, exotic veneer from the last quarter of the 18th century, when we first started to import it and use it. But it is the most expensive sort, which, ironically, was unstable. So a man was using this almost in the knowledge that, with time, it would crinkle.
Really?
And crack. Here, he'd had to put a piece in, and if you come to the top, you'll see these wonderful, almost dark as a conker look to this, almost a chestnutty colour, and yet it's this rippling, deep satinwood effect, deep satin effect. A little bit of damage to the top with the watermark, but that's cosmetic. Now, you then come to the oval panels themselves, and they are bordered and delineated with rosewood, a thin piece of ebony and a thin piece of boxwood to give it a black-white line. You'll see that repeated on there. There's a good example here. That goes all the way around. When this was new, the satin was bright yellow, pale yellow and dark, and then black, white, and then this grain satinwood around the outside forming crossbanding. Now, at the end of the 18th century, there were two designers of furniture in the classic style, both George Hepplewhite, and Thomas Sheraton. Sheraton is the name that would come to mind largely because of the use of the satinwood. When we open this, here you have what could be straight out of Hepplewhite's drawing book, rather than Sheraton, the use of mahogany inside here, with two drawers, which are 1775, 1795 in period and in shape, with a cock bead, original handle, and then for ultimate use, you have adjustable slides. Faced up with mahogany, the back of which is pine. Absolutely traditional. And there it is, simplicity itself, but total use. So what at first looks like just a nice, well-designed cabinet or cupboard is in fact an exceptional piece of furniture. So goodness knows, this was made by an important maker. could be someone like Inson Mayhew. It's as good as that. It's really quite remarkable. If one went into a good gallery where you'd have to go to buy such a piece as this today, you'd have to give between 25 and 30,000 pounds. Well, I think she'll be rather stark. I hope she'll be pleased with it.
The first I saw of it was in about 1948. My uncle acquired it, bought it, brought it home, and he died young and left it to his sister, my mother, and she left it to me. I inherited it 1985. But
Oh, right.
Other than that, I don't know anything about it,
Right.
no.
The proportions to me are not of the Sheraton period, the first great period of satinwood furniture. They're not that 1790s proportions. It's not big enough in a way, and at the same time, it's not small enough. It's a mid-size, which wasn't really made in the 18th century. So that points to me automatically that it's probably a later 19th century or getting towards the Edwardian period, so 120 years old. But also the wood itself, this wonderful, as we call this, satin wood. The type of wood like this came from the first 18th century wood, came from the West Indies. And then as those sources became non-commercial and more difficult to get out in forests and ship over to England, they started taking pieces from the Dutch East Indies, the East Indies. Most of the West Indian satinwood has more movement in it, so it's more satin-like, more like silk and tissue material. So that really, to me, that and the proportions date it towards the late 19th century. So it's a typical late Victorian lock, possibly 1880, 1890, something like that. A very good London lock maker. So this has been made by a top dollar cabinet maker in a major London showroom, Holland or someone like that, Edwards and Roberts, one of the big London cabinet makers. And let's just see what it looks like inside. It's in such wonderful condition. Oh, look. And doesn't it open beautifully? So the cylinder bureau is a French 18th century idea. The trouble is they often jam, but this one's working perfectly. It really is in lovely condition. Well, in a shop, this would cost you certainly a minimum of £8,000.
8,000? I was expecting around about 2 or 3.
There you go.
Well, the shape of this is absolutely unmistakable, I think. It's a rather sarcophagus shape is what I tend to call it, which is really characteristic of a Regency cellaret or wine cooler. Now, what do you use this for?
I use it for keeping magazines in, as my parents did before me.
So it's been in the family for some time?
Yes. Well, I inherited it from my parents, but I know that they had it for some considerable time before that. Like I say, it has to have been in the family at least 40 years.
40 years. So they use it as a magazine, Canterbury, as well, did they?
Yes, they did. They called it Canterbury.
And when we look inside, that becomes absolutely obvious because it now has divisions for the magazines. But in fact, still at the bottom, right at the bottom here, is the little bolt which would have been the bung, so to speak, for to let out the water from the cellaret. And it would initially have had a tin liner as well to protect this rather beautiful mahogany from the water. And very classical, very simple. It has the lion mask handles at either end, quite chunky, quite bold. It's been quite carefully modified, if you like, to become a Canterbury. Except that to me the legs look a little bit light for the weight of the cellaret itself.
Yes.
And I wonder if perhaps the legs were also added, quite sympathetically in a way, so this is a little bit too light, when the adaptation was made.
Yes, I see.
That something like this ought to be £600 or £700 in a sale room.
Yes.
A pair of whatnots. Curious word, isn't it?
It is, yes. Do you know the origins of it?
Actually, no. I mean, really, they are étagères, stages, platforms, and were developed in the latter part of the 18th century from France. And then, during the 19th century, they became multiform, with columns in every shape and size, particularly by the sort of 1860s, 1870s. In the 1880s, it started to get very much more elegant. A renaissance of classical style came in, and superb quality whatnots developed like this. And I think that name stemmed from the fact that somebody would say, "Where shall I put this, mother?" And they'd say, "Well, put it on the whatnot." And the name stuck, absolutely. Yes. I can think of no other reason.
No.
Now, this very style is typical of the makers of the 1870s, 1880s, the top quality. They're Crace and Son, Holland and Son, and of course Gillows. And they followed this line of ebony and a strong contrasting timber. And then you'll see here, outside this, framing it, is this strong ebony colour, black ebony, and then this beaded edge, which actually sparkles. And the note of quality is the amount of it there is round all the edges. And another piece of quality are 2 drawers in each. Usually one either in the base or sometimes one in the top, but one each end is pretty good. And nice to see the original little knobs here with their carved wood fascia. And when we open the drawer, there you are. You've got Gillow & Co., the magic name. The magic name. If you pull the two together, there are just slight differences in the pattern. You can see there you have a plain groove or a reed. Here you have a little heart at the top, a little heart shape. And there's a slight difference in the size of the turned feet.
Yes.
So not quite a pair, a matched pair. Gillows had innumerable differences, slight differences in their patterns. It really, to all intents and purposes, matters not. Now, any maker's name on a piece of furniture adds to the value. So not only the historical value, also the monetary value. And in this case, of course, Gillows is probably the greatest increase in any name on a piece of furniture, certainly in the 19th century. Now, have you had these a long time? I mean, this is sort of
No, we've just had them about 3 years. And,
oh, really?
Yes. We saw them in a local antique shop. We thought they looked so neat and well proportioned, and then we realised that they were Gillow. We just liked them, thought they were very attractive.
Oh, they're charming. They're as good as you'll see. If we take this little piece here, that would cost today in the region of probably £4,500 to £5,000 without the name on. With the Gillows name, double at 9,000. A pair, even a matched pair, would be certainly 22,000. They are so desirable, they're so fashionable. These are ideal pieces of furniture.
Wow, it's amazing.
And you bought extremely well.
I bought it in Dorset, so is it a Dorset piece? I don't know. I don't know that much about it.
Right. But looking at the whole shape of it, it's a Welsh dresser, basically. But what's interesting, this idea of the 3 drawers with the arch in the middle is more typically from the Brecon area.
Oh, right.
And what confirms it to me is the fact, have you noticed that this shelf is much wider than this one or the one below it?
Yes.
Do you know why that is?
Because bigger plates would have gone here, meat dish or something, I don't know.
Right, but recent studies have determined that it's more subtle than that. And this is fascinating. In Brecon, traditionally meat plates, the big decorative meat plates, wouldn't be rectangularly placed like that in a landscape form. They'd be placed in a vertical portrait form. So you needed a higher shelf.
That's just aesthetic, is it? It's
purely aesthetic, but it's a regional characteristic of just Brecon. So that alone is enough to say it's Brecon for me.
All right.
I'm just going down to the base now, because there are 1 or 2 things just very quickly to point out. It's unusual to have this chamfered leg. It would normally be a ring-turned leg in Brecon. He's either very fashionable, this man, or he didn't know how to turn.
I see.
You're missing the front and back stretchers, which you probably realise. But what would be really nice to replace is the wood would have been boards, 2 to 3 boards running left to right.
Yes.
And that would obviously set it off a bit.
Yes.
And I think that's probably worth having redone.
Really?
Because it's an unusual dresser. It's a nice size, it's the original height, it's not very big, cottage furniture. I could go on for a long time on this.
I brought it in to find out whether it's worth having restored, because I wasn't sure whether the plate rack was original to the base because of it being a different material.
Totally original, totally original. So how long ago did you buy it?
A year ago, almost to the day.
Right. What did you pay for it a year ago? This is always the difficult bit.
£4,000.
4,000. Well, I was going to say that it would make £2,500 to £3,500 at auction. I think it's a fair market price, and I think if it can be well restored, I mean, I think I'd have put £4,000 to £4,500 for insurance. So I think you're already beginning to recoup the payment you've made. And I think if you have it nicely restored by a good restorer, it's going to go up really quite quickly. It's a good buy, and I'm really, really excited to see it.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I'm pleased that you're pleased to see it.
I found it in my boyfriend's house, which is quite an old dilapidated place with lots of rooms. It was up in an attic room, coated in dust, obviously not cared for very much. So he said, would I like to look after it, as I clearly did like it. A little while later, we discussed what would become of it, if we should part or anything else happened.
Right.
And by then, he was using a viola that belonged to me. And so we decided we'd both be very happy with the arrangement that he would keep the viola and I would keep the cupboard.
So what do you know about it as an object?
I'm afraid nothing, because his family over the years has been left all sorts of bits of furniture, so we don't know how old.
Well, that's easy, in fact. It's made of mahogany, and it's made in Holland. It's Dutch. It's Dutch marquetry, which was very, very popular in the 17th century and was revived in the early part of the 19th century. And it's exactly to when this dates to. And one of the easiest ways of dating this really is the door. We've got this lovely sort of Gothic arch, so Gothic Revival arch, which would come into England and Northern Europe in around the 1810, 1820 period. It's amazing, I find, in the early 21st century that we still find things in the attic. What's the viola worth?
Well, it was an English handmade one that I paid about £700 for.
Right, so is it a good swap or not? Right, well, this is worth between £700 and £800.
Really? Well, then we're both very happy still, so...
No winners, no losers. That's perfect.
Gosh.
Living with this display cabinet, it must be a little bit like living in the country. It's absolutely full of floral and foliate and field detail, isn't it?
It is, yes.
Is that how you think of it?
Well, yes, and I always did live in the country. I remember it from a little girl with my parents, and when they passed away, it came to me. So we lived in the country, and yes, it was full of most beautiful little things. I used to gaze in it.
I can understand that, but what really takes my eye is all the marquetry detail that you have here in lots of different woods, particularly the cow parsley decoration here, which has been echoed in the carved detail underneath here, which I think is so delightful. And even in the legs, you get the sense of the organic, the stems of growth somehow, don't you? But what I also noticed is this little signature into the marquetry with that magical name of Gallet. Gallet was someone who loved the country, and he liked to turn his furniture into organic objects. And if you follow the legs up and go up and up, you can see how he continues the theme all the way around, which is really delightful. Gallet is one of the names of French Art Nouveau. So he was working at the end of the 19th century. In fact, he died in 1904, so he just went into the 20th century. If you look at the carving in the gallery here, you can see that it doesn't have a great deal of detail in it.
Right.
And this is somewhat indicative of the more commercial pieces that he made. So there's a mixture between the very high quality exhibition pieces and this, but this is still extremely attractive. People love this kind of decorative object. Its sale value, auction value, might well be around £3,000.
Really?
Yes.
Oh.
Wonderful, wonderful legs. I don't think I've seen 4 legs like that on a card table before, outside of a museum. There's everything there that there should be on an English card table. The scroll is a double scroll. It's got this curvilinear little paper scroll at the top here. And then that wonderful shell. Then right down here to little drops from this pendulum here. And then a claw and ball foot to die for. Isn't it wonderful? I mean, that's a claw and ball foot. There is the sacred pearl of wisdom being held by the dragon's claw as you've never seen it before. Wonderful. All the shape in the world. I'm sorry, I haven't even said hello. I'm just looking at the table. Is there a family history with this?
It was bought by my grandfather probably sometime in the 1920s or possibly 30s, and then passed to my father and thence to me.
See, in the 1920s when this was bought, this was the sort of furniture that everybody loved. You couldn't sell plain furniture. And this was the original carving that they tried to recreate on so many other plain pieces. And the difference is that a plain table, later carved, will have that shape, but the carving is within the outline. Here, you've got the shell stuck onto this wonderful knee, there it is as if it's applied. To draw that and then create it is something else. And why 4 legs? Normally you have 2 at the front, and then the 2 at the back are sort of more modest, you know, a bit cheaper. It's jolly expensive to carve 4 legs on one table. But it's an occasional piece of furniture, for an occasion. This stood at the side looking very grand. Then after dinner, after the cocktail party, you used it for games or for taking tea. And it extends not with things that flap out. This is a concertina action, okay? So called because it concertinas out. And then when you open it, like so, then you've got a center table. You look at it from here, it's just as beautiful. I mean, what a table.
The top is original, is it?
Totally, totally. This has never been touched. But of course, it spent most of its life closed like that and against the wall looking very, very grand. One of the best bits of furniture I've seen for a long time. So this time, this period, 1755, 1760, George II, maybe early George III. And in today's market, a modest insurance valuation would be 15,000. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's a modest valuation. If it turned up in a very good or important sale, I don't know when I would want to stop bidding, actually. More than that, I cannot say.
It was my grandfather's. My grandfather brought it in the 1950s.
Yes.
My grandmother passed it on to me.
Well, that's marvellous, isn't it? Because what looks like a standard dining table reveals the solid oak, blonde oak leaves, and what we've got underneath is this great little snooker table. And I bet the children have loved it, haven't they?
Well, they do. The 5-year-old's not allowed near it yet.
No 5-year-olds on this table.
No 5-year-olds.
Well, because let's see, it's built by Mr. Riley of Accrington and solidly made. Riley started making billiard tables around 1900, 1899 to 1900. And this compact convertible dining table model was very popular. They started making it in the 20s. And do you know when this one was actually made? Did your grandfather buy it, or?
We've got the brochure for 1951-52, which I've assumed is when he made the purchase for it.
Yes. Well, that would be about right. So a long production run for Riley's with these things. You convert it from a dining table by picking it up from below, and it goes on those kind of cantilevered arms, which is really clever. It's a fantastic object, and in brilliant condition. And you've got some accessories. We've got the scoreboard.
The scoreboard, yeah.
Yeah, and a
we've
box.
had that out on the wall occasionally.
Yes, and a good box of balls and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
At auction, you're likely to get about £1,500 to £2,000.
Really?
That sort of price. You should insure it for £2,500.
The wine cooler is clearly mahogany from the Regency period. But what is interesting about the books you brought along with it is that the books stopped before the Regency period. The age of satinwood was around up until about 1800, and the Regency wine cooler is from 1810, 1820. So when this was written, here we are, 1904, nobody considered the Regency period at all. So here's a major book, one of the first ever really serious dictionaries of English furniture, written by this well-known Percy McCoy in 1904. I think the last volume was 1908, not talking about Regency furniture at all. 1800, that was the cut-off date. McCoy, who wrote these volumes, he was a decorator and advisor to wealthy people. He left part of his collection to this museum in Brighton. And of course here you have an oak chair, probably Flemish, circa 1500. But we now know, because it's in the museum, that in fact it's a fake, made in probably the back streets of London about 1850, 1880, that sort of date. So the first item, one of the first pieces you come to is a fake. And this is one of the problems with this book. And also fascinating that a lot of the pieces were actually fake. Just moving on, this one, we've got the age of mahogany, and it's strange when you think this is the mahogany period he's writing about in this volume, and here we have a piece of walnut, a walnut cabinet. But there's no question of it. This cabinet like this, these wonderful oyster veneers, which is typical of the William and Mary period, wouldn't have cabriole legs like that. Probably have an extra drawer and on a low bun feet or a low stand.
Yes.
So here's a major colour plate in the book, and it's clearly not right.
So the people who are named in the book wouldn't actually have known this, would they?
No, not at all. Here we have two pieces by William Kent from Houghton Hall in Norfolk. And when he was using these pieces, they were perfectly right. They weren't fakes at all.
No.
The books are really rather a descending investment, whereas the Regency piece is ascending, so at least it compensates a bit. And these were reprinted in the last decade, and of course the value has gone down a bit. A set like this, probably between £400 and £500 in a shop. The Regency piece of furniture here, which looks like it's been in the family for a long time,
Yes, it has.
that's going up in value. I think that you could certainly expect an auction value of £2,000 to £3,000, and I think therefore if you wanted to insure it in a shop just cleaned up a little bit, probably even for slightly more than £4,000 today.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you.
That's wonderful. Now we know.
Yes, now we know.
Over 30 years ago, I bought a house and contents.
Yes.
And this was one of the contents.
And was it a big country house or was it a small house?
The gentleman who unfortunately died is how I came to buy the house. He did collect from country houses. He was a collector and a restorer, and he was a friend of the family.
So he would have probably picked it up maybe at a country house auction or something like that.
Of that nature, yes.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. Although it's only a stool, it's a very grand stool. It's on a much bigger scale than some. And to me, it gives the impression that it may have been part of a much larger suite of furniture at some time or other. Now, it's actually in the sort of state that people who collect furniture love to see things first of all. But the design is the thing which really strikes me. It's very elegant, very much in the taste of the George IV period. So what is known as the Regency period, or it was probably dates from the time in the 1820s when the Prince Regent had become George IV. It's got absolutely gorgeous white and gold decoration. And what is most unusual is that the decoration, I suspect, has never been redone. So although it's very dirty, and you can see on the higher surfaces where the gilding's worn and where the dirt has really interfered in the effect, it could all be cleaned, and I think one would end up with a very genuine surface. But it's a very, very bold design, and interestingly, it corresponds very closely with a design which was published in 1826 by somebody who claimed to be a cabinet maker, whose name was George Smith. He published two books. He published a book of designs in 1808 and the second volume in 1826. And this stool is almost straight out of that design. Now, George Smith claimed to be a cabinet maker, but no furniture by him has ever come to light. So this is most likely made by another very proficient, I'm sure, London cabinet maker, but after that design. You've had a little bit of restoration on it in one place that I know in particular, and that's here, where there's obviously been some damage, and that's been replaced, and there's no great problem in getting that put right. In terms of value, even in this state, I would say that you should insure it for £4,500 to £5,000. It's a very, very good piece of Regency furniture.
In this condition?
Even in this condition. And if it were to be restored, it might be worth a bit more, but it would need to be very gently restored.
Yes,
if it was over-restored, it would almost reduce its value. But it's in a state which is perfect to be improved. It's a gorgeous thing.
These drawers is the property of Anne King of Lane House in Midgley, June the 12th, 1840. Now tell me, who was Anne King?
She was the sister of my husband's great-grandmother.
Right. And how did you find this then?
Well, it came down from my husband's mother when she died, and it was stored away in the box room.
And in the chest of drawers?
There were these 4 samplers folded up.
All folded up. Well, you've obviously had them framed since.
We've had them framed last year.
But what's so nice is that here we've actually got a sampler by Anne King, the girl who owned the chest.
Yeah.
When she was given this, she was 36, but when she worked this, she was 16. And it's a lovely little sampler with all sorts of sweet little detail in it. And we have the date 1822 here. And you've obviously got the work of 2 sisters here.
Yes.
So you've got Anne and her sister Elizabeth.
Yes.
And in each one you've got a similar basket and growing shrubs.
Yes.
Not identical, but it's very much the same
Yes.
sort of thing.
Yes.
And sadly this one here has been washed at some time. I mean, the important thing is that they stay all together because it's a lovely family history here. You've got an absolutely delightful little chest of drawers made of mahogany with these bone escutcheons and ebony turned handles, and the family samples that go with it. And of course, although these are enormous sentimental value, the real commercial value is in the piece of furniture.
Yes.
the samplers are probably worth, commercially, probably no more than 100, 150 pounds as a little set. But the piece of furniture is worth about 2,000 pounds.
Really?
So it's a nice little combination.
Yes, yes. Oh, well, very nice to know, thank you.
This is Dutch, or to be more precise, it's Friesian.
That's what I was going to say. How do you know that? I'm supposed to tell you that.
Because my mother, to whom it belonged, comes from an old Friesian family in Holland, and this was passed down to me after she died.
We're talking here about the 17th century, and this is a time when Holland was obviously a wealthy country. The tulips, of course, the famous tulips until the early 17th century were very, very expensive items. The tulip bulbs made the Amsterdam traders very rich. Holland was a great seafaring nation at the time, and of course the farming was always very rich, but very, very provincial. I think it's difficult to imagine quite how provincial that would be.
The family were seafarers and merchants, in fact.
Right.
For many generations,
And it probably would have taken quite a lot of money to buy a piece like this in the 17th century.
There's an awful lot of work gone into it. I mean,
well, there has. I mean, I love the various mouldings here. I mean, you've got this one here, which is almost like a thumbnail, an overnail, like scale pattern really here, and then you've got a variation of it, like a sort of ripple moulding here, but all done by hand. This is not a machine. This is one man laboriously carving each little piece out like that, which I love. And I'm rather stuck here. I mean, this is sweet. The hearts. That's very nice indeed. So it may have been perhaps a marriage coffer.
Well, I was told that it was a marriage coffer, and that they had them at the foot of the bed for putting the linen in or something.
So in that case, we assume these are billing doves.
You know, I've never noticed the birds there. No, they are birds, aren't they?
Two amorous birds, two love birds, let's say, for the marriage chest.
And the date, would that be the date of it was made, or the date of the wedding, maybe, or something? Is that 1701 on there?
I think it's 1701. There's something about the cutting. I don't think it's the same hand. If you look really closely,
it's very crude.
Very crude and very, very deep compared with the subtlety of the rest of the carving. So it probably is later. You know, with these provincial pieces in any country, it's very difficult to date within 50 years. So, I could say 1650. It could be 1700. What's anything inside that's interesting?
I don't think particularly interesting. No.
It's fairly original. That's nice.
Is that a candle box at the end, or?
Candle box, yes, traditionally, and a lovely lock. Oh, it's a snap lock. Oh, that's a wonderful period. So that lock is 300 years old or so,
and
still
it
working.
should snap shut when you close that.
Let's just try. Let's just try. I think so. Yes. So. Yes. So heaven help you if you've taken the key out and you can't open it. It snaps locked and that's it. But what a nice piece of furniture. Now I suspect that you probably know more about the value of this than I do because
no, I don't.
You haven't had it valued recently or anything.
No, not at all.
I think at auction in London, a pre-sale estimate of about £2,000 to £2,500.
Oh, that's nice.
And I think it would probably be bought by a Dutch person or a Dutch dealer over to the Netherlands. I could see it in an Amsterdam shop for probably 5,000, something like that.
Oh, right. Well, this is nice to know.
It's a very early piece.
Yes, lovely.
And part of your history. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes.
This cresting here is completely wrong. I think it's been made specifically to go on this chair to replace an earlier cresting for whatever reason. The other one might have been broken, damaged or lost or something like that, or simply offended whoever it was. Or also there's a third dimension for that. A lot of this period oak furniture was carved up in the 19th century. And this type of carving, I would guess, is sort of certainly second half of the 19th century, possibly even 1880 to 1900. Because there were clubs of people would go to evening class to learn about carving. And this is certainly amateur, and I suspect that's what's happened here. So whether somebody replaced it because they preferred that. And the problem is the iconography is lost a little bit, because with this cresting is later and means not a lot to me. It's some sort of rather mad-looking man, isn't it, here?
Yes.
But was it bought in this part of the country? I mean, what, in Yorkshire or
Sheffield?
In Sheffield,
Sheffield,
right.
yes.
Because there's something about this back, certainly the square panel back, and more importantly, the marquetry here is more typical of Yorkshire, or more specifically Leeds. When you think that this chair is basically middle of the 17th century, 1640, 60, that sort of date.
Right.
So Leeds was one of the biggest towns in the country outside London. Wealth, money, and the opportunity to build really an important joiner's chair in oak like this.
Yes.
And they favoured marquetry like this. You can see how thick it is, where this piece is missing,
Yes.
great big thick chunks inlaid in there, including, I think, probably mother of pearl there by the look of it.
Yes.
And it's of tulips. And of course, tulips at this time were very valuable indeed. Whole estates were wagered and lost on the price of a tulip bulb. And when the tulip crash came, many, many people were ruined because one tulip bulb was worth thousands of pounds.
Tulip mania.
Exactly. So that's all part of the decoration and aesthetics of this period. But when you look here, it's interesting because with the cresting later, when you look at these dental or teeth mouldings, as they're called, these are clearly, this shiny colour here is not 17th century. And when you look all the way around, I suspect they've all been replaced.
Well, it did have some restoration work done on it about 10 years ago, because this was a family piece that was knocked around by children and dragged here and there for parties, and lots of these fell out.
What do children do in a party on this?
Oh, they
Dance
sit on it,
or
you know, the birthday person
all right,
at the
the
head
king's
of the
chair.
table.
Yes, yes, oh, lovely, lovely. But there are lots of wear on the arm. It's nice, genuine wear, perfectly genuine 17th century arm. And again, very nice decoration down here. The front and the sides have got this nice lunette, as it's called, incised carving, which is all perfectly period and genuine. Often has been copied in the 19th century when people were carving up with plainer oak pieces. But this is all perfectly genuine, in my opinion. The problem is his values. I mean, it really is a problem. Dramatically altered, I'm afraid, by the back. If that cresting was right, I can see that in a shop for sort of £4,000, possibly even more, something like that. But unfortunately, because of the cresting, it's made a huge difference to the value.
Yes, yeah.
And it might be more realistic to put only £1,000 on it.
Right.
Just because of that, unfortunately, major alteration.
Yes.
So what can you tell me about your salon suite?
Is that what it is?
That's what it is.
We bought it a year ago in Suffolk.
Okay.
So it hasn't been in the family, it's very new to us, and we really don't know anything much about it, except we think it's French Art Nouveau, and that's about where it is.
Okay, well, you're thinking on the right track, because first of all, the wood in question is pear wood, and the great thing about Art Nouveau design is that it tends to use organic forms. I mean, just look at the way this top rail actually sort of gives that almost a whiplash effect. And then look at this. The cabinet maker has actually contorted that armrest because the inspiration here is obviously it's organic. Yeah. I mean, just look at the way that this foot runs down there. It's almost as though it's growing out of the floor, isn't it? And then these little details of trailing ivy. When it comes to the actual designer, tricky. You're right to say it's Art Nouveau, but at this stage I should point out that there are lots of different international interpretations of Art Nouveau, and in France there were regional interpretations. There were two main schools, the Paris school and the Nancy school. Now I think we're dealing with the Nancy school here, because if there was a name to say it's in the style of, and I emphasize in the style of, it would be Louis Majorelle. It's got a very much a Majorelle feel to it. However, what it really sort of falls apart really is in the quality of the carving. It's not quite up to Monsieur Majorelle's standard. Now, I need to ask you a question, and that is, have you had it upholstered yourselves?
No, it was like that when we bought it.
Was it?
And I assumed that it had been reupholstered totally wrongly.
You're correct in your assumption, madame. Yes. I mean, it's a rather interesting Regency stripe. It's nice. It's relatively tasteful. Had it been put on a chair that dated from 1800 and not 1900,
wrong for this.
I'm afraid it is totally wrong.
So.
You're going to have a lot of fun putting that right anyway. So, if I was to go out and buy this today, I would expect to pay round about £2,500. So, I hope that comes within the parameters of acceptability.
It does.
It does.
Absolutely.
Phew, that's safe, bearing in mind you only bought it a year ago.
It looks good, but it's not a big enough desk, really, for a man. It was bought by my maternal grandfather for my grandmother when they lived near Lancaster in the late 20s or the early 30s, from, I think, a shop called Waring and Gillows.
I see. Well, you mentioned a desk, and it is clearly a secretaire cabinet. But I think it's got all these different elements of style, which is very characteristic of a particular period, which is a little bit earlier than when it was bought for your grandmother. Is that right? Because this sort of gallery at the top, very open, very tall gallery, is quite arts and crafts in character, which takes it back to the 1880s, 1890s. And in lots of ways, the sort of angularity of it is very related to arts and crafts furniture.
Yes.
Multi-purpose, very much an English feature, with a desk at the top, cabinet at the bottom. And I think if we just open there, it's a pretty little straightforward secretaire interior. But as you say, in a way, it's kind of female. It's a
it has that feel to it. You know, I mean, I think it was a very appropriate gift for my grandmother.
Absolutely, I think that's nice. But perhaps above all that is the decoration on the front of the cabinet, particularly these great sprays of decoration, which at first sight look a little bit like balloons. Yes. Very, very cheerful balloons. But in fact, with the mother of pearl inlay is clearly honesty.
Oh, I never thought of that.
And with the whiplash stems here, we're in our Nouveau country.
Yes.
The whiplash is very continental French, Belgian Art Nouveau. The angularity here is more secessionist Viennese Art Nouveau. All coming together in something which has got a slightly arts and crafts character and makes it very English, I think. I'm sure this is an English piece. And then down here, cabinet part, little doors. I know, I think that is so smart.
Yes, I've loved that all my life, since being able to crawl around and notice it.
That is very sexy, I think. It's so
well, that had never crossed my mind, but I'll think about it.
But that is delightful. But also inside, it shows that it's not just a cabinet, but a music cabinet.
Yes, yes.
And the quality of the piece of furniture is fantastic. It's beautifully made. You've seen how those doors work. The ground wood is mahogany. Now, I don't know who made it. You mentioned Waring and Gillows, which is a company that really established itself in the late part of the 19th century, but it's not particularly the kind of style I associate with them.
Well, I understand from my father, whom I asked just the other day, that this may not have been new when it was bought there at that time, because they also sold second-hand furniture.
Excellent, because I think that it was probably literally second-hand when he bought it, made around at 1900, 1910, and quite expensive when it was first made. Now, I think you would certainly put, for insurance purposes, at least £3,000 on it. Mm-hmm. And it's the kind of thing that I think is increasing in interest in the collector's market. So it's a lovely little piece of furniture. Thank you very much for bringing it.
Very interesting.
Well, I've seen some strange pieces, but this takes the biscuit, I think. It's just fascinating. It looks like a rather late version of a Carlton House desk. This sort of horseshoe part here, space, and all these little compartments. What's the family history?
My mother bought it about 40 years ago in Montreal, and she's had it since then. She moved into a retirement residence 3 years ago and handed it down to me.
Wonderful. And you use it as a desk?
As a desk. Oh, yeah, I use it every day.
Excellent. Well, these compartments slide backwards and forward, and the drawers pull out, and there is a clue that perhaps the drawers aren't quite as old as they should be.
Okay.
The construction with little pins in here, you see?
Right.
And we have some little plywood
bits on the bottom.
On the bottom. And really, I think rather nearer the 1920s than earlier. However, if we look back at this thing, this is rosewood, and it has this moulding around here, which is a typical French moulding of the 1840s. 1830, 1840, 1850. This was very popular. Now the legs, I mean, they're something else, aren't they? Aren't they just wonderful?
They're fabulous.
They'd look probably better on a piano, would you think?
I was wondering if they're the original legs of this desk or if they've been added.
I think they are the original for what this desk was originally.
Oh.
I.e., if you look here, we have a cut, and another one there, and a cut in the moulding just there. And it's been shortened.
Oh.
And it was a piano.
It was a piano?
It was a piano, yes. An 1840s piano. And there's a piano.
You're right. Oh my goodness. I can't believe it. I would have never, ever, ever guessed a piano. Wait till I tell everyone.
Now, value-wise, it's slightly difficult then, isn't it? Shall we value it as a very good-looking desk?
Oh, I think so.
I think we should, don't you?
Right, because that's what it is today.
Absolutely right. And in Britain, it would cost best part of £800, which is probably best part of $2,000.
Dollars, right.
Oh.
Wow.
Yes.
That is surprising. I mean, it is so surprising. I can't believe it.